The mark went dark on the third day, and Spore Master Hadeth Vorn smiled, because nothing had ever stayed dark from him for long. He floated in the scent deck of the hunting cutter Long Patience, a low room walled in living glass, and around him hung 900 threads of light. Each thread was a trail. Each trail belonged to a ship somewhere in the cold, and Hadeth could read them the way a younger creature reads a single word. He had tracked prey across 40 years and 11 empires. He had never lost a quarry he chose to keep. The tracking houses of Veshdrow did not lose. That was the whole of their faith, and Hadeth was the finest tracker the houses had ever bred. The human ship had a name they could not pronounce, so the houses had filed it under a number, Quarry 7711. It had wandered into the Sorel Verge alone, a single hull where ships traveled in tens, and that loneliness had been the first sweet sign. Lone things were lost things. Lost things wanted finding. Hadeth had taught that to 4 generations of trackers, and 4 generations had carried it into the dark and come home fat. Quarry 7711 ran without escort. It ran without a beacon. It moved through the verge the way a wounded animal moves through tall grass, slow and quiet, and pretending to be smaller than it was. Hadeth had seen 10,000 wounded things pretend. He knew the shape of it. He had begun the hunt with the calm of a creature who already knows how the story ends. For 3 days he followed the human in the patient way of his house. He did not chase. Chasing was for the young and the hungry. Hadeth seeded the human's path with spore buoys, little drifting eyes that drank the wake of a passing hull and remembered it forever. He read the human's drive shadow, the faint warmth a ship cannot help but leave, the way a foot cannot help but bend grass. He tasted the dust the human burned and named the human's age from the burning. He built the human in his mind, plate by plate, until he could have drawn the ship blind. And then on the 3rd day, the human went dark. The drive shadow thinned to nothing. The buoys drank empty void. The trail Hadeth had braided across 3 days simply stopped, the way a footprint stops at the edge of deep water. To any other tracker in the galaxy, it would have looked like loss. Hadeth laughed, soft and low, and the young trackers around him laughed because he did. He had seen this trick 100 times. A frightened quarry cuts its drive, drifts cold, and prays the hunter will pass it by in the dark. It was the oldest hope of the hunted, and it had never once worked against a house cutter. A cold ship still has mass. A cold ship still bends the dust around it. A cold ship still holds the warmth of its crew, 1,000 small fires that no hull can fully hide. Hadeth flushed cold ships from the deep, the way other creatures flush birds from a bush. He gave the order without lifting his voice. The Long Patience opened its deep eyes. These were not the crude sensors of lesser fleets. The houses had spent 9,000 years learning to see what wished to stay unseen, and their instruments were grown, not built, vast organs of crystal and nerve that could feel a single warm body across the width of a star system. Hadeth had hunted with them his whole life. He trusted them more than he trusted his own hands. The deep eyes swept the dark where the human had vanished. They found the warmth at once. Of course they did. A faint, banked glow. A ship pretending to be a stone, exactly where the trail had ended. Hadeth felt the old satisfaction settle into his chest. The fool had cut its drive and gone cold, and it had done it badly, leaving a smear of heat that any apprentice could read. He marked the position. He laid in a slow, curving approach that would bring the Long Patience up from beneath and behind, out of the human's blind quarter, the way his house had closed on prey since before the human species had words. He was 3 hours into that approach, savoring it, when the second warmth appeared. It was identical to the first. Same banked glow, same false stone. It sat a quarter of a light minute away, in a place the human could not possibly have reached in the time it had been dark. Hadeth frowned, just slightly, and ordered the deep eyes to look again. There were now 4 warmths. By the time the young trackers finished counting, there were 60. 60 faint, cold ships, scattered through the verge like seeds from a burst pod, each one perfectly the right size, each one glowing with exactly the heat the human should have had. They did not move. They simply waited, 60 patient stones, and every single one of them looked like the truth. Hadeth had hunted for 40 years, and in 40 years he had built a sense for the rhythm of a quarry's fear. A frightened ship made frightened choices, and frightened choices had a pace to them, a quickness, the jerky rhythm of a creature deciding too fast because the dark was closing. This had no such pace. 60 decoys had not appeared in panic. They had appeared in order, evenly spaced across the verge, each one set down with the unhurried precision of a thing that had decided exactly where every piece would go, long before the hunter arrived. There was no fear in the spacing, there was design, and design, in the dark, belonged to the hunter, not the hunted. The young trackers did not see it. They saw a clever trick and grew excited, the way the young always do when a quarry shows them something new. Isk, the sharpest of them, was already mapping the 60 stones with bright, eager strokes, plotting which to weigh first, certain that 59 of them would prove hollow, and the 60th would be a hull to hang on the spore wall. Hadeth let it work. But the old unease had begun in him, the small cold thread that had kept him alive through 40 years where lesser masters died, the thread that whispered when a hunt was running too smoothly to be a hunt at all. A quarry that flees is a quarry. A quarry that arranges 60 pieces across a star system before the hunter has even closed is something else. Hadeth did not yet have a word for the something else. He would learn it. But standing in the scent deck of the long patience, watching 60 patient stones wait in perfect order in a verge his house had hunted for 1,000 years, the finest tracker of Veshdrow felt, for the first time in a very long time, that he had walked onto ground that someone else had measured first. He pushed the unease down, because a master who chases every whisper of unease never closes on anything, and because the alternative to pushing it down was a thought no house tracker had ever been permitted to finish. He chose, instead, to do what he had always done. He chose to close. A younger tracker would have panicked. Hadeth only narrowed his eyes. He understood at once what the human had done, and a thin thread of respect uncoiled in him, the respect one predator feels for another. The human had not hidden. The human had multiplied. It had flooded the verge with decoys, little drifting heaters wearing its own face, and it had buried its true self among them. It wanted Hadeth to waste his hunt sorting false from real. It was clever. It was the cleverest cold running he had seen in 20 years. But Hadeth Vorn did not sort by heat alone. No housemaster did. Heat could be faked, and the young always faked it, and the old always knew. He reached past the warmth and called for the deeper reed, the one his house guarded like a relic. He called for mass. A decoy might glow like a ship, but a decoy was a hollow thing, a lantern in a paper shell. Only one of those 60 stones would have the weight of a true hull, the dense cold pull of engines and armor and guns. Find the mass, and the trick fell apart in his hands. The deep eyes weighed the 60 stones, one by one, and Hadeth waited for 59 of them to come up empty. They did not. Every stone had mass, every single one. 60 hulls, each as heavy as a warship, each pulling on the dust with the dense dead weight of real armor and real engines. It was impossible. No fleet that small could carry 60 true hulls as decoys, and no human ship that ran alone could be 60 ships at once. Hadeth read the numbers again, and the numbers did not change, and for the first time in a very long time, the Spore Master felt the floor of his certainty creak beneath him. The young trackers waited for his command, and he made them wait, because a master does not act inside his own confusion, and Hadeth was confused for the first time in 20 years. He ran through everything his house had ever learned about heavy lies. There were ways to fool the warmth reed, the young faked heat all the time, and the old always saw through it. There were ways to fool the wake reed, though they were rare and clumsy, and a house cutter caught them in a heartbeat. But there was no way to fool the mass reed. Mass was the one honest thing in the universe. A hull was heavy or it was not. The dust either bent around real weight or it did not. The houses had hunted for 9,000 years on the simple faith that you could lie about everything except how much you weighed, and now 60 ships, that could not all be real, were all, impossibly, pulling on the dust like the truth. Either the universe had broken its one honest rule, or the human had found a way to lie about the unliable thing, and Hadeth did not know which possibility frightened him more. He did not yet understand. He would spend the next many hours coming to understand, and by the time he did, it would already be far too late. But in that moment, he made the only choice his pride allowed. He closed on the nearest stone. He would weigh the real thing with his own eyes, crack one decoy open, learn how the trick was done, and then unmake the rest. The long patience turned toward the nearest cold ship and crept in, the great hunter sure of its ground. The cold ship had been waiting for exactly that. The human warship was named the Ardent Vow, and it had let itself be tracked on purpose. Hadeth did not know that yet. He crept toward the nearest cold stone with the care of a master, his cutter dark, his crew silent, his deep eyes drinking every fleck of warmth and weight the false ship gave off. He was 4 light seconds out when the stone spoke. It did not roar. Hadeth had expected a roar. Frightened things roar when they are caught. Instead, the stone simply opened a single narrow band and laid a voice across the void, calm and unhurried, in the trade tongue of the verge that every hunting house had carried for 1,000 years. The voice said, "We counted you the whole way in." Hadeth held very still. The young trackers looked to him. He did not answer the voice, because answering was a thing the hunted did, and he was the hunter. But he felt the words settle into the scent deck like a chill. The voice spoke again, in no hurry at all. It said, "Spore Boy 9 12 hours ago. Spore Boy 17, 9 hours ago. Spore Boy 31, 6 hours ago. You seeded our path with eyes. We let you. Each eye you dropped, we picked up after you passed, and we read it back the way you read us. We know the warmth of your hull, long patience. We know the burn of your drive. We know you are the cutter of a housemaster, because no apprentice closes this slow." Hadeth's frown deepened. The human had its buoys. That should not be possible. Spore boys were grown to sense, and never to be sensed, dark to every instrument but a housecutter's own. And yet the human had named them by number, in their dropped order, with their drop times. It had not merely felt the buoys. It had collected them. The stone he was approaching shifted, just slightly, and Hadeth understood that it was not a decoy at all. The mass had not lied. This was a true hull, 60 true hulls, and the trick was not 60 ships pretending to be one. It was one ship that had taught the Verge to lie about its number. He learned the rest in pieces over the long hours that followed, and the learning was the worst part, because Hadeth Vorn was a creature built to understand his prey, and understanding this prey took him apart one belief at a time. The Ardent Vow was a single warship of the Terran Deep Watch, the quiet arm of a species the houses had filed under primitive on the strength of how loud their early signals had been. The Deep Watch was not loud. The Deep Watch had studied the hunters of the dark for 60 years, the way a careful animal studies the thing that eats its kind, and it had built one ship to answer the trackers in their own grammar. The vow did not hide from being tracked. It could not be hidden. Nothing truly can. So it had done the harder thing. It had learned to control exactly what its hunters found. The 60 cold stones were the vow itself, written across the verge by a thing the humans called a mass echo lattice. Hadeth never fully grasped the machine. He grasped what it did. The vow could fold a slice of the dust around itself and throw a copy of its own weight and warmth into empty space. A ghost with real heft, a lie the deep eyes had to believe because the lie pulled on the dust exactly as a hull would. The humans had not faked 60 ships. They had taught the void to be heavy in 60 places, and only one of those places held a crew that breathed. Which one, the deep eyes could not say. That was the whole point. Aboard the Long Patience, the young trackers wanted to fire. Hadeth would not let them. A housecutter carried teeth enough to gut a cruiser, but firing on 60 ghosts taught the ghosts nothing and taught the human everything. He would not be made to spend his fury on empty stones while the real ship watched and learned his guns. He throttled back. He held. He spoke at last, because the silence had become its own kind of surrender, and he chose his words to wound. He said, "You hide well, little one, but hiding is the work of prey. You have made yourself 60 because you are too frightened to be one. A house does not lose a trail. We will weigh you ghost by ghost, and when we find the one with a heartbeat in it, we will hang your hull on the spore wall of Veshdrau, and the apprentices will study how a clever creature dies." The voice from the stone was quiet for a moment. Then it answered, and there was no fear in it, and that absence was the thing that began to frighten Hadeth. It said, "You misread the trail, Spore Master. You always do. You think the lone ship is the lost ship. You think the quiet ship is the weak ship. You have hunted 40 years on that one idea, and it has never once been tested, because everything you ever caught was running. We are not running. We came into your verge alone, because alone was the bait. You have been walking a trail for 3 days. It was laid for you. You are not reading our wake. You are reading the path we wanted your feet to take, and it ends here, where you cannot see the ground." Hadeth opened his mouth to answer, and the deep eyes screamed. Not all at once. The scent deck dimmed, thread by thread, as the 900 trails on the living glass began to fail. The buoys Hadeth had seeded across 3 days went blind, one after another, in the exact order he had dropped them, as if a hand were walking back along his own path and putting out his eyes. He spun to the deep reed, the grown crystal organ that had never failed him in 40 years, and found it choking. The human had not blinded it. That would have been a mercy he could have understood. The human had filled it. The mass echo lattice was throwing ghosts faster than the eyes could weigh them, 60 becoming 90, 90 becoming 200, the whole verge filling with heavy lies until the deep eyes could no longer tell the dust from the stones from the truth. The instrument that let Hadeth see what wished to be unseen was drowning in things that wished to be seen. He was, for the first time in his long life, blind in the dark. A housemaster does not panic. Hadeth had buried that reflex generations ago, but he felt his certainty come apart, plate by plate, in the same patient way he had built the human in his mind, and he understood with a cold and growing horror that the building had run the other direction the whole time. He had thought he was assembling a portrait of his prey. The prey had been assembling a portrait of him. Every buoy he dropped had told the vow how he hunted. Every patient hour of his slow approach had taught the vow the shape of his caution. He had spent 3 days describing himself to the thing he meant to kill, and it had listened to all of it, and now it knew him better than his own house did. The voice came one more time, from a stone he could no longer find among 200 others. It said only, "Now we begin," and the ardent vow went quiet, and somewhere in the blinded verge, the real ship began to move. Hadeth had read the trade tongue all his life, and he heard the thing under the human's words that the young trackers missed. The vow had not threatened him, it had not boasted, it had simply counted, the way Hadeth counted, the way a master counts, and there was no creature in the galaxy a hunter feared more than another hunter who counted better. He had spent 40 years being the one who counted in any room. He understood, in the silence after that voice, that he was no longer that creature here, and the understanding sat in him like swallowed ice. He turned to the scent deck and tried to do what he had always done, which was to read his quarry from the small honest signs it could not help but leave. He called for the wake trace, the faint disturbance any moving hull drags through the dust behind it, the one thing no ship in 9,000 years had ever learned to hide. The wake trace was the bones of his trade. A ship can run cold, can run silent, can wear 100 false faces, but it cannot move through the deep without bending the deep a little, and a housemaster reads that bending the way a hunter reads a footprint in soft ground. Hadeth had never once failed to find a wake. The wake trace came back, and it was a forest. 60 wakes, then 100, then more than he could number, crossing and braiding and doubling back, each one perfect, each one exactly the disturbance a true hull would drag, and Hadeth understood that the human had not stopped at faking warmth and weight. It was faking motion. The mass echo lattice did not merely throw heavy stones into empty space. It dragged each stone through the dust on a false path, Laying down wakes the deep eyes had to believe, because awake was the one sign Hadeth trusted above all others, and the vow had known that, because Hadeth had taught it that, 3 days ago, with his own patient hunting. He sat with that for a long, cold moment. Every tool he reached for, the human had already poisoned. Warmth, weight, sound, wake. The 4 pillars of the house's 9,000-year craft, and the vow had built a lie tall enough to stand on every one of them at once, and it had built each lie in the exact shape of the trust Hadeth placed in it. This was not a ship hiding from a tracker. This was a tracker's own faith turned into a weapon and aimed back down the trail at him. Isk, the sharp young one, crept close in the dimmed scent deck and asked the question in a small voice. It asked, "Master, how does it know which tools we use? We have not fired. We have barely moved." Hadeth answered honestly, because lying to the young was the habit that had killed Sable Run, though he did not yet know that name. He said, "It knows because I showed it. 3 days, Isk. Every buoy I dropped, it gathered and read. Every hour I crept, instead of charged, it learned my patience. I thought I was describing the prey. I was describing the hunter. There is nothing in our craft this ship does not now hold, because I handed it our craft one careful piece at a time, certain the whole while that I was the one doing the catching." The young tracker had no answer to that. There was no answer. The two of them sat in the failing light of the trails, master and apprentice, and watched the trait of Veshdrow used against itself, and Hadeth felt the first true respect of his life for a thing that was not of his house. The vow had not beaten him with a bigger gun or a faster drive. It had beaten him with his own gift, more patiently than he had ever wielded it, and there was a terrible cold honor in that, the honor one finder feels for a better finder. Hadeth ordered the long patience to a full stop and went still, because stillness was the only ground he had left. If he could not see, he would listen. He had hunted blind before, in nebulae thick enough to chew the deep eyes, and he had learned to read a ship by its sound alone, the groan of a hull under thrust, the cough of a drive lighting. He killed his own engines until the cutter coasted dead and let the scent deck fall to a single sense. He told his crew to make no warmth, no sound, no signal. He turned the long patience into a stone of his own and waited to hear the human breathe. He heard nothing for a long time. Then he heard everything. The ghosts had voices now. The mass echo lattice, having drowned the deep eyes, began to feed them sound, and the sound was the vow, 60 times over. 60 drives lighting in 60 places. 60 hulls groaning under thrust. The careful blind hunting that had carried Hadeth through the worst nebulae of his life was suddenly worthless, because every trick he had for finding one ship by ear now found him 60, all real, all moving, all wrong. The human had not merely beaten his eyes. It had studied the way house masters hunt when their eyes fail, and it had built a lie for that too. Hadeth had 100 ways to find a hidden ship. The vow had spent 60 years learning every one and growing a ghost to fill it. He understood then, fully, what the human had meant. You misread the trail. You always do. The long patience drifted dead in a verge full of phantom warships, and Hadeth Vorn, who had never lost a quarry, could no longer find one. He could not even find the way out. The buoys that marked his own path home had gone dark in their dropped order, and the human had not just put out his eyes, it had erased his footprints behind him. He had walked into the Sorel verge tracking a lone wounded thing, and the lone wounded thing had closed the door. He did the thing a housemaster is never supposed to need to do. He called for help. The long patience carried a tight, deep-buried signal thread, grown to reach the nearest hunting station across half a light year and to be heard by no one else. It was the lifeline of a house cutter, used perhaps once in a tracker's whole career, and Hadeth had never used his. He sent it now. He sent the verge's coordinates and a single word in the old tongue of his house, a word that meant, "The quarry has turned." It was a word the houses had not heard in 9 generations. The signal thread opened. Hadeth felt it reach, and then he felt it answered, faster than any station could have answered, because the answer did not come from a station. It came from the human. The voice on his own lifeline, his own deep-buried thread, the one channel in the galaxy a house cutter trusted to be private, said, "We have been listening to that thread since before you entered the Verge. It is how we knew which house to expect. We knew it would be Veshdral. We knew it would be a master, because the houses only send a master after a lone ship, and a lone ship is what we offered them. Your station will not hear you, Spore Master. The only ear on that thread is ours. You called for help into the mouth of the thing that came to eat you." Hadeth Vorn went cold all the way through. He had given the human its name. He had given it his house. He had given it the slow, patient shape of his own hunting. 3 days of it, freely, the way a fool empties his hands before a stranger. And now he had given it his lifeline. There was nothing left in his cutter the human did not already hold. He sat in the dark of his own scent deck, surrounded by phantom ships and erased footprints, blind, unheard, and known, and he finally turned his master's mind to the only question that mattered. Not how do I catch it, how do I survive it? He did not yet know there was no answer to that question either, but he had begun, at last, to ask the right one, and that was the first honest thing the hunter had done since the 3rd day. The young trackers around him were past frightened now. They had grown up on the faith of the houses, the simple, unbroken truth that a tracker is never the tracked, and they were watching that truth die in real time on the walls of the scent deck. One of them, a sharp young creature named Isk, who had read trails since hatching, spoke the thing none of the others dared. Isk said, "Master, the lone ship rule, the whole of our hunting rests on it. If the lone ship was the bait, then every lone ship our house ever caught." Isk did not finish. It did not need to. Hadeth finished it in his own mind, and the finishing was a wound. If a lone ship could be a trap, then the lone ships the houses had been catching for 9,000 years had not all been lost things. Some of them, perhaps many of them, had been waiting, and the houses had walked into them fat and proud and certain, and the certainty had been the bait every time, and the only reason the houses still believed themselves invincible was that the traps that closed all the way left no one to carry the lesson home. The vow meant to be a trap that carried the lesson home. Hadeth understood that now too. It had not destroyed the long patience. It could have, 60 times over, in the first hour. It was choosing not to. It wanted a witness. It wanted a housemaster to live inside the knowledge that the floor of his faith was a lie, and then it wanted that master to carry the lie back to Veshdral and pour it into every apprentice who ever dreamed of the dark. That was a crueler thing than killing. Hadeth, who had hung 200 hulls on the spore wall, recognized it for what it was. It was his own trade turned around in his hands. The humans had not come to catch a ship, they had come to catch a faith, and they were doing it the patient way, the master's way, the way Hadeth himself had taught 4 generations to close on prey. He gathered what was left of himself and made his crew busy, because a crew with nothing to do drowns in its own fear. He set Isk to mapping the phantoms by their tiny differences, the faint imperfections that even a perfect lie must carry, hunting for the seam. He set the gunners to a firing solution they would never use, just to keep their hands steady. He took the helm himself and began, very slowly, to feel for the edges of the verge by the one sense the human had not yet flooded, the simple cold pull of the real stars beyond the trap. And for a few hours, it almost worked. Isk found a seam. The youngster came to Hadeth with a thread of light trembling on its claw and said that of all the phantom ships, one carried a flaw the others did not, a faint stutter in its mass, the kind of imperfection a lattice makes when it has to keep a real crew alive inside the lie. One ghost breathed differently. One ghost was not a ghost. Hadeth looked at the flaw for a long time. Then he did something that surprised even himself. He did not fire on it, because the lone ship rule had been a trap, and a found seam in a perfect lie might be a trap too. The human had taught the void to be heavy where it wished. A creature that could write 60 true hulls into empty space could surely write one flaw on purpose, a single stuttering ghost left out like a baited stone. so that a desperate master would spend his teeth on it and reveal his guns and his place and his fear all at once. Hadeth had laid that exact trap himself, 100 times, a wounded-looking decoy to draw the first shot. He knew the smell of it, so he held his fire, and in holding it, for one bright moment, Hadeth Vorn outthought the trap. He saw the bait and did not take it. He felt for the first time since the third day like a master again. The voice returned to his scent deck, and it was warmer now, almost kind, which was the most frightening thing it had done yet. It said, "Good, you did not shoot the flaw. Most of them shoot the flaw. We left it for you the way you leave a limping decoy, and you knew it, and you held. You are better than the ones before you, Hadeth Vorn. That is why we chose your house. A lesson is only worth carrying if a worthy creature carries it. You have just earned the right to learn the rest." And then the human told him how long it had been hunting him. Not 3 days. Not since the Verge. It had been hunting the tracking houses of Veshdrao for 19 years. Hadeth heard the number and did not believe it, and then believed it all at once, the way a creature believes the ground is gone only after it has already begun to fall. 19 years. He counted backward through his own hunts, the proud ones, the famous closings the apprentices still studied, and he understood with a slow horror that some of them, perhaps many of them, had taken place inside a span of time when this single quiet ship had already been studying his house, learning its grammar, building the lattice that had drowned his eyes tonight. He had been hunted while he hunted for 19 years, and he had never once felt the eyes on his back, because a housemaster does not look behind him. A housemaster has never needed to. That was the whole of the gift the vow had come to take away. 19 years was longer than some of Hadeth's apprentices had been alive. The voice laid it out for him with the same patience the houses prized in themselves, and Hadeth listened, because there was nothing else left to do, and because a master who cannot hunt can at least learn. The captain of the Ardent Vow was a woman named Tilde Aro, and she told him the truth, the way a tracker reads a trail, in order, leaving nothing out. 19 years ago, the houses of Veshdrao had found the human colony of Sable Run. It was a small place, 4,000 people on a cold moon, a quiet farming world that had wandered too near the Sorel Verge, while looking for room to grow. The houses did not war on Sable Run. The houses did not war at all, in the way other empires did. They hunted. A lone human freighter had strayed into the Verge that year, exactly as the vow had strayed now, and a housemaster had tracked it home, the way Hadeth tracked everything home, and the trail had led to Sable Run, and the houses had done what they always did to a found thing. They had taken it. Not in battle. The houses had no taste for battle. They had simply tracked every ship that left Sable Run, one by one, over a single year, and taken each one in the deep, where no help could come, the way a patient creature thins a herd. They never struck the moon. They never needed to. They strangled it. A colony cannot live if nothing that leaves it ever arrives, and Sable Run leaked its life into the dark, ship by ship by ship, until the farming world was a tomb with the lights still on. 4,000 people. The houses filed it under quarry cleared and moved on, and an apprentice that year learned how a master strangles a world without ever firing a gun, and that apprentice grew up and bred apprentices of its own, and one of them was riding in the long patience right now. Hadeth knew the file. He had read it as a younger master, Sable Run. He had thought it elegant. He remembered thinking it was elegant. Tilde Aro had been 9 years old on Sable Run, and she had left on the last ship out, and the houses had tracked that ship for 11 days and lost it in a storm and filed it as cleared without checking. One ship, one child, the single trail the houses of Veshdrao had ever let slip, and they had not even known they let it slip, because losing was not a thing they believed could happen to them, so they had not bothered to look. She had spent the next 19 years making certain they would never lose another trail again, by making certain there was nothing left of them to track. Hadeth listened to all of it without moving, and the part of him that was still a master kept reading the captain's voice for the shape of her hunt, the way he could not stop reading anything. He had expected hate in it. He had hung enough quarry to know the voices of the grieving, the ones who came back for the killers of their kin, and they all carried the same hot edge, the edge that made them careless. Tilde Aro's voice had no edge at all. It was patient the way the deepest cold is patient, the way Hadeth himself was patient on his best hunts, and that was what frightened him most, because a grieving creature that has gone cold and patient is not seeking blood, it is seeking change, and change is the one thing the dead can no longer be argued out of wanting. She told him how she had built the vow, in pieces, over the years, and Hadeth understood the genius of it as she spoke. The Deep Watch had not tried to outfight the houses. No fleet outfought the houses, because the houses never fought, they only ever found and strangled. So the Watch had studied the finding itself. For 19 years, human ships had drifted near the edges of the Sorel Verge, lone and quiet and seemingly lost, and every one of them had been a lesson. Some had let themselves be tracked a little way and then slipped free, just to watch how a house cutter closed. Some had dropped instruments grown to look like debris that drank the deep-eye sweeps of passing hunters and carried home exactly how the houses saw. The humans had spent 19 years learning to be hunted, the way a creature studies the thing that eats its kind, until they understood the house's craft better than most house apprentices ever would. And then they had built one ship that knew it all, and they had sent it in alone, as bait, because alone was the only shape the houses could not resist. Hadeth said, almost to himself, "You let us catch the small ones, the early ones, the ones that slipped free and the ones that did not. You spent your own people learning us." Tilde Aro was quiet a moment. Then she said, "No, we spent no one. Every ship that drifted your edges came home. Every one. We do not strangle our own to learn a thing, Spore Master. That is your craft, not ours. The ships you remember slipping free were meant to slip free. We learned you without losing one of our own, because we learned you the way you should have learned us, by watching and not by taking. That is the whole difference between our species, and it is the difference that is about to cost you 9,000 years." The words landed harder than any gun. Hadeth had assumed, without thinking, that the humans must have paid in lives to learn the houses so well. That was simply how learning worked, in his world. The idea that a thing could be studied that thoroughly, and that patiently, without anyone dying for it was, to a housemaster, almost more alien than the mass echo lattice. It meant the humans had built a craft to rival the house's own, and had built it clean, and a clean craft is a craft you can carry into the open and never have to bury, and a craft you never have to bury is a craft that wins. Hadeth said, "Into the dark. One ship cannot end 9,000 years of houses." Tilde Aro said, "It does not need to. It only needs to end the one thing that holds them up. You believe you cannot be tracked. You believe you cannot be the prey. Every house you have, every cutter, every master, every apprentice, rests on that one belief, the way a great weight rests on a single pin. We did not come to break 9,000 years. We came to pull the pin. After tonight, every tracker in Veshdrau will hunt, knowing that the lone ship might be waiting, that the quiet trail might be a leash held at the other end, that the thing they close on might already have closed on them. We came to teach the hunters fear. A hunter that fears the dark is no longer a hunter. It is only one more frightened thing hiding in the deep, like everything it ever ate." And then she showed him. The long patience was not the only house cutter in the Verge. Hadeth had thought it was. The Verge was his hunt, his quarry, his closing. He learned now that he had been the last of 3. 2 other masters had tracked lone human ships into the Sorel Verge in the past 19 months, 2 of the proudest cutters of Veshdrau, and both had sent the turning word down their deep-buried threads, and both threads had emptied into the ear of the ardent vow, and neither cutter had ever come home. The houses had filed them under storm and current, the way they had filed the child of Sable Run, because a house does not lose a master, so a master who does not return must have been taken by the dark and not by prey. Hadeth had come to the Verge, believing he was the hunter of a wounded thing. He had been the 3rd fish to a baited line that had already taken 2, and the houses, in their certainty, had not even noticed the first 2 were gone. The deep eyes, choked as they were, caught the proof when the vow let them. 2 cutters, dead and cold and kept, drifting at the edge of the verge where the phantom storm thinned. House cutters, grown from the same living crystal as the long patience, hung in the dark with their deep eyes dark, exactly the way the houses hung human hulls on the spore wall. The vow had not destroyed them either. It had collected them. It kept its quarry the way the houses kept theirs, and it had been keeping housemasters for 19 months, patiently, waiting for the third, the worthy one, the finest tracker the houses had ever bred, so that when the lesson finally went home, it would go home in the mouth of the best. Hadeth Vorn understood, then, the full shape of the thing that had caught him, and the understanding was complete and merciless and almost beautiful. He had spent his life on a single faith. A tracker is never the tracked. The humans had not argued with that faith. They had simply built a creature for whom it was true, and let the faith pull the houses one by one into its jaws, and the more certain the master, the deeper he walked before he felt the teeth. He sat very still in the ruin of his certainty, and he asked the one question a master is permitted at the end. He asked it without pride, which was itself the proof that the pride was gone. He said, "Why keep me alive to know it?" Tilde Aro answered without cruelty, which made it worse. She said, "Because a dead master teaches nothing. The houses have lost masters before tonight, and learned nothing from it. Because the dead cannot file a report. They simply vanish into your storm current lie, and the faith goes on unbroken. We do not want you dead, Spore Master. A dead hunter is a hunter the houses can forget. We want you to live, and remember, and go home, and stand in front of the apprentices of Veshdrow, and tell them with your own mouth that the lone ship was a trap, that the quiet trail was a leash, that the finest tracker in 9,000 years was caught in 3 days by a single ship he never once saw clearly. We want you to be the report the storm current always swallowed. That is the only way the pin comes out. A hunter has to carry the fear home himself, or the house will only file it under loss and hunt again tomorrow." Hadeth was quiet for a long time. The young trackers watched him. Isk, the sharp one, had stopped looking for seams. There were no more seams to find, and they all knew it now. In that quiet, Hadeth did the thing a master does when he can no longer hunt outward. He hunted inward. He turned the deep eyes of his own mind on himself, the way he had turned them on 10,000 quarry, and he read his own trail back across 40 years, and he did not like what he found. He found the file on Sable Run, and he found that he had not merely thought it elegant, he had taught it. He had stood younger trackers before the record of the strangled farming moon, and used it as a lesson in patience, in the art of taking a world without firing, and somewhere out among the houses there were masters hunting right now who had learned how to strangle a colony from his own mouth. He found 100 lone trails he had followed home, freighters and wanderers and quiet ships, and he understood now that he had never once asked what those ships were carrying, or who waited for them, or what small quiet world went dark because they never arrived. He had filed them all under quarry cleared, the way the houses filed everything, and he had slept well after, every night, for 40 years. The reading of his own trail was the worst hunt of his life, and it was the most honest, and when it was done Hadeth Vorn understood that the human had not destroyed him. It had shown him to himself, the way it had shown the houses to the houses, and the showing was the whole weapon. There was no gun in the galaxy that could do what a true reflection did to a creature that had spent its life refusing to look. He had hung 200 hulls believing each one was proof of his greatness. He saw now that each one had been a small, quiet world that could not find him back, and that the inability of the dead to find their killer is not greatness, it is only distance. He had mistaken distance for might for 40 years, and a single quiet ship had closed the distance, and the might had turned out to be nothing at all. And the Spore Master, who had hung 200 hulls and never lost a quarry he chose to keep, did a thing that no housemaster had done in 9,000 years. He laid down the hunt, not in surrender. The vow had not asked for surrender, and there was no flag in the dark to lower. He laid it down the way a creature sets down a weight it has carried so long it forgot it was heavy. He stopped trying to catch the human. He had understood, finally, that he never could, and the understanding did not break him. It freed something in him he had not known was caged. He said, "There is a flaw in your lesson, human." Tilde Aro waited. Hadith said, "You think a housemaster, made to carry shame home, will pour it into the apprentices and pull your pin, but you do not know my house. A master who comes home beaten is not believed. He is unmade. They will say the storm took my mind, not my hunt, and they will file me under broken and send a younger master to the verge to prove me wrong, and that master will believe the lone ship is lost the way I believed it, because the faith is older and louder than any one ruined creature's report. You cannot pull the pin with one frightened master. They have a way of forgetting frightened masters. I taught it to them." There was a silence on the thread, and then Tilde Aro, captain of the Ardent Vow, said the thing that turned the whole night over one final time. She said, "We know. We did not bring you here to be the report. We brought you here to choose to become it. A master who is made to carry shame is dismissed. A master who chooses to carry the truth cannot be. You just told me the one way the lesson fails. That means you already understand it well enough to make it succeed. You are no longer the report we caught. You are the master who decided. The houses can forget a broken creature, Hadith Vorn. They cannot forget the finest tracker they ever bred standing whole and unafraid in front of the apprentices, telling them he was caught and that it was just, and asking them to be the first generation of hunters who do not pretend they cannot be hunted. That they will remember. That you can carry. We could not make you into it. You had to walk the trail yourself. You just did." And Hadeth realized that this too had been a hunt. The truth had been the bait. His own pride had been the path. The vow had not closed on his ship. It had closed on his mind. 3 days of it. Patiently, the way a master closes on prey, and it had brought him to the one place where the only way out was through the door it had built for him. He had been tracked to a decision, and he had reached it himself, which meant it was his, which meant no house could take it back. The Spore Master looked at his young trackers, at Isk, who had read trails since hatching, and he saw in their faces the thing the vow had wanted him to see all along. They were watching to learn what a master does when the faith breaks. Whatever he did now, they would carry it. That was how the houses worked. That was how every faith worked. The lesson went home in the mouth of the one the young trusted most. He had spent 40 years being that mouth. He understood, at last, exactly how much power he had, and exactly what the humans had spent 19 years to make him willing to spend it on. The long patience drifted in a sea of phantom warships, blind and unheard, and held in the jaws of a thing it had come to eat, and its master made his choice. He did not yet say it aloud, but he had made it, and the vow, reading him the way he had once read everything, knew. The phantoms began, one by one, to wink out. The phantoms went out the way they had come in, 60 becoming 40, 40 becoming 20, until only one true ship remained in the Sorel Verge, and Hadith Vorn saw the Ardent Vow clearly for the first time in 3 days. It was smaller than he had built it in his mind. That was the last surprise the human gave him, and somehow the sharpest. He had filled the Verge with a monster, a thing of 60 hulls and drowned eyes and erased footprints, and the true ship was a single lean gray warship, a third the length of a house hunting station, scarred along one flank, running dark and quiet and patient. It had beaten him not with size but with knowing. It was exactly as large as it needed to be, and not one plate larger, and Hadith, who had spent his life reading the size of things, understood that he had never once been fighting the ship. He had been fighting what the ship knew about him. The vow let him see it as a gift. It had no more need to hide. The hunt for his mind was over, and a creature does not hide from a thing it has already caught. It hung there, in the cleared dark, weapons cold, eyes open, and it waited for the master to speak. Hadith spoke. He did not speak to the human first. He turned in the scent deck to face his crew, the young trackers of his house who had watched their faith die on the walls, and he gave them the truth in the order a tracker gives anything, leaving nothing out, because he had finally learned that the leaving out was the lie that had killed Sable Run. He told them about the colony. He told them about the 4,000 strangled in the deep, ship by ship, by a master who thought it was elegant. He told them about the two cutters hung cold at the edge of the verge, the masters the houses had filed under storm, because losing was not permitted to be real. He told them that the lone ship rule was a trap that had been laid in both directions for 9,000 years, and that the only reason the houses still believed in it was that the trails which closed all the way left no one to carry the lesson home. He told them that he had been the third fish on a baited line, and that the bait had been his own certainty, and that there was no shame in being caught by a worthy thing, only in pretending it could never happen. And then he told them the part that mattered. He told them they were going home, all of them, alive, and that he was going to stand before the apprentices of Vestrow and say every word of it again, and that he expected them to stand beside him and not let the house file him under broken. He told them that a hunter who fears the dark is a frightened thing, but a hunter who respects the dark is something the houses had never been and might yet become, and that the becoming was worth more than 9,000 years of pride. Isk, the sharp young one, asked the only question left. It asked, "Master, if we go home and break the faith, the houses will stop hunting. What are we, if we do not hunt?" Hedeth looked at the young tracker for a long moment. Then he said the thing the vow had spent 19 years and 3 captured cutters to put into a housemaster's mouth. He said, "We are trackers, the finest in the galaxy. We can find anything in the dark, and that is a gift, and we have spent 9,000 years spending it on the strangling of small, quiet worlds because they could not find us back. Sable Run could not find us back. That is the only reason we called it prey. Tonight a quiet world found us back, and we could not bear it, and we called it a monster. It is not a monster, Isk. It is a mirror, and a house that cannot bear its own reflection has been hunting the wrong thing the whole time. We will go home, and we will be trackers still, but we will find lost ships and bring them in, and find strangled worlds and warn them, and we will never again call a thing prey, because it cannot find us back. That is what we are, if we choose it. That is the only thing worth being." Isk was quiet, and Hedeth watched the young creature turn the words over, and he saw the exact moment they took hold, because he had spent 40 years reading faces, and the turning of a faith was the clearest reading there was. Then Isk asked the second question, the harder one, the one that meant the first had landed. It asked, "Master, the worlds we strangled, Sable Run, the 100 others, they are gone. We cannot find them and bring them home. What good is the new craft to the ones already dead?" Hedeth had no easy answer, and he did not pretend to. He said, "None. We cannot bring back the strangled, Isk. No craft can. That weight does not lift. We will carry it the rest of our lives, you and I, and the carrying is just. But the dead are not the only ones the new craft serves. There are worlds in the dark right now that we have not yet found. There are ships not yet taken. The strangled cannot be saved. The next ones can. We do not get to be clean. We get to be different, starting now, and we owe that difference to the ones we cannot save, because the only thing worse than what we did would be to do it again knowing what it costs. The dead bought us this knowing with their lives. We do not honor them by weeping. We honor them by making certain no one else joins them." The young tracker bowed its head, and Hedeth saw that the answer had been the right one, harder and truer than any comfort, and that Isk would carry it, and that it would make the young creature into exactly the kind of tracker the galaxy had never had. He felt, watching it, the first warmth he had felt in days, the warmth of a thing planted that would grow long after he was gone. The young trackers were silent, but Hedeth saw it land. He had spent 40 years reading faces in the dark, and he saw the faith turn over in them, not break but turn, the way a hull turns toward a new heading, and he knew the lesson would go home now no matter what the houses tried to file. The vow had been listening, of course it had. Tilda Aro's voice came one more time, and it was quiet, and for the first time it sounded tired, the tiredness of a creature that had carried a thing for 19 years and was finally setting it down. She said, "That is the report we wanted, Spore Master. Not the shame, that. Say it to the apprentices in those words, and the pin comes out on its own." Hedeth said, "You could have killed 3 cutters and sent the ash home. It would have been faster. Tilde Aro said, faster, and it would have taught your houses nothing but that the verge is dangerous, and they would have come back with 10 cutters instead of 1. We did not want to make you afraid of the verge. We wanted to make you ashamed of Sable Run. Fear sends more hunters. Shame sends none. We learned the difference the hard way, watching what fear did to my own people for 19 years. Fear would have made us hunters too. We chose the other road. It is slower. It is the only one that does not just move the strangling somewhere new. And Hadith understood the last thing about the ardent vow, the thing that finally let him respect it without bitterness. It had every right to cold revenge. A child of a strangled world, 19 years of patience, 3 house cutters in its jaws, and the finest tracker of the killers helpless before it. It could have hung them all on a wall of its own. No one in the galaxy would have called it wrong. The houses had earned every bit of it, and it had chosen, instead, to spend all that patience and all that power on making the killers into something that would not kill again. It was the harder hunt. It was the longer trail. It was, Hadith thought, the only hunt he had ever heard of that ended with both creatures alive and neither one prey. The humans had taken the most dangerous thing they could have taken, more dangerous than any cutter or master, and they had taken it without firing a single shot. They had taken the house's future, and they were handing it back changed. The 2 captured cutters at the edge of the verge were not dead. Hadith learned this last. They were cold and dark because the vow had put their crews into the deep sleep the humans used for long, quiet hunts, and held them 19 months, and kept them whole, waiting. 2 masters and their trackers, alive, asleep, never once harmed. The vow had not been hanging trophies. It had been gathering witnesses. 3 house masters, the proud ones, the certain ones, so that when the lesson finally went home, it would not be one ruined creature's tale against the faith. It would be 3 masters, whole and unafraid, saying the same impossible thing together. The houses could forget 1. They could not forget 3, standing in front of the apprentices, telling the same truth in the same words. The 2 masters were not strangers to Hadith. He knew them both. One was Vesk Orant, a hard old tracker of the Western houses, who had taught Hadith the deep read when Hadith was an apprentice no older than Isk, and whom the houses had grieved with a wall reading 2 winters past, certain the storm current had taken him. The other was a younger master named Drael, sharp and proud and bound for the highest seat of the houses, before the verge swallowed it. Hadith had stood at both their wall readings. He had spoken the words of letting go over masters who were, this entire time, asleep and whole a half a light year away, held in the patient hands of the thing the houses called prey. He had grieved the living and called it duty. The wrongness of it sat in him like a stone he could not put down. He asked the vow, then, the question that had been growing in him since the second cutter appeared. He asked, why hold them so long? 19 months for one. You could have sent the lesson home a year ago. Tilde Aro answered without hesitation, because she had clearly thought about it for the whole 19 months. She said, because 2 masters is 2 masters' word against 9,000 years, and 9,000 years would win. 2 can be called liars. 2 can be called broken by the storm. 2 can be filed and grieved a second time and forgotten. We needed a third, and not just any third. We needed the finest the houses had, the one the apprentices would believe even when they wished not to. We needed you, Hadith Vorn. So we waited, and we kept these 2 whole and safe and dreaming, until the houses sent their best tracker after a lone ship, because the houses always send their best after a lone ship. We have been patient. We learned patience from watching you hunt. It is the one thing your craft taught us worth keeping. Hadith understood then that the waiting had been a kindness as much as a strategy. The vow could have taken any third master, any cutter that wandered the verge, and ended the wait early. It had chosen instead to wait for him, specifically because his word would carry where another's would not, and to keep Vesk and Drael safe and unharmed through every month of that waiting, dreaming and whole, rather than spend them cheaply on a lesser lesson. The humans had been more careful with the lives of their enemies than the houses had ever been with the lives of anyone. Tilde Aro woke the other 2 cutters as Hadith watched, gently, the way one wakes a sleeper who has been under a long time, and their deep eyes lit one after another in the cleared dark, confused and afraid, and then, slowly, understanding. Vescarant's old voice came first across the cleared void, rough and bewildered, asking where the storm had gone, and Hadeth answered him, master to master, and told him the truth, in the order a tracker gives anything, and the old creature was silent for a long time, and then began, quietly, to weep, which Hadeth had never once seen a housemaster do. Drael woke harder, proud and disbelieving, and demanded to know why the human had not killed them, and Hadeth gave it the answer the vow had given him, and watched the pride drain out of the young master, and something better, something humbler, begin slowly to take its place. He felt something move in his own chest that he had no name for, because the houses had never given their masters a word for the relief of finding the lost found. He had a word now. He had learned it from the human. It was the same feeling Tilde Aro must have carried for 19 years and never gotten to feel, because the houses had never given back a single one of the things they took. The vow was giving back 3. It was teaching the lesson in the act itself, not just in words. This is what it feels like to return a thing instead of keeping it. Remember the feeling. Build your house on it. Hadeth gathered his crew and his words and his 3 cutters, and he made ready to leave the Sorel Verge alive, which no housemaster had ever expected to need to do, which no housemaster had ever been allowed to do. The vow opened the way. The erased footprints came back. The trail home relit one buoy at a time, a path laid not to trap him now but to guide him. The same skill turned to the opposite purpose, and Hadeth understood that he was watching the whole of his trade redeemed in a single gesture. Tracking could close a door. Tracking could also open one. The houses had only ever learned the first half. He took the helm of the long patience himself, the way a master should, and he turned his cutter toward home, and the 2 other cutters fell in behind him, 3 house hulls that the houses had given up for dead, running back out of the verge in the open, lit, unhidden, unafraid. The vow watched them go. It did not follow. It had no more need to follow anything. The hunt was over, and it had won the only victory it had ever wanted, which was a victory that left the loser more alive than before. At the edge of the verge, where the phantom storm thinned into honest stars, Hadeth stopped his cutter one last time and opened the deep-buried thread, the lifeline that the human had been listening to since before he entered, and he sent a signal home. Not the turning word this time, not the word that meant the quarry has turned. He sent a longer message, in plain trade tongue, so that no house could file it under storm and hide it. A message addressed to every cutter and station and apprentice of Vesh Drow, a message that said, "This is Spore Master Hadeth Vorn, alive, with 2 masters thought lost. We were not taken by the storm. We were caught, and rightly, and we are coming home to tell you why. Hold the spore wall. There is a thing you all must hear, and it cannot be filed." He sent it open, where the houses could not bury it, and then he turned for home. The ardent vow let him go, and somewhere behind him, in the cleared dark, the single gray warship hung quiet and patient, weapons still cold, having fired nothing, having taken everything. The predator the houses had come to track drifting, unhurried, in the ruin of their oldest faith. Hadeth ran for home with the truth in his mouth, and 3 crews alive behind him, and for the first time in 40 years of hunting, the Spore Master was not afraid of the dark. He was afraid of what the dark had taught him to become. But that, he was beginning to understand, was a different and better kind of fear, the kind that makes a creature careful instead of cruel, and he carried it home like a trail he finally wanted to follow. The spore wall of Vesh Drow was the largest hall in the galaxy that the houses cared to admit existed. It hung at the heart of the home station, a vault of living crystal 3 kilometers across, and on its walls were the trophies of 9,000 years of hunting, 12,000 hulls, freighters and cruisers, and lone wandering ships of 40 species, each one tracked into the deep and taken where no help could come. Each one hung cold and dark, as proof that the houses did not lose. Apprentices were brought to the spore wall on their first day to learn what they were. Masters were brought to it on their last day to be remembered. It was the heart of the faith made into a room, and Hadeth Vorn had stood before it 900 times, and he had never once felt small in it until now. He stood before it now with 2 other masters at his side, and 3 crews behind him, and the hall was full. The houses had answered his open signal the only way a proud thing can answer a thing it cannot bury. They had gathered everyone, to see the broken master shamed in public, and the faith restored. Hadeth knew the plan. He had used it himself. Let the frightened creature speak, let it stammer its impossible tale, and then let the weight of 9,000 years and 12,000 hulls crush the tale flat, and send the apprentices home certain again. The spore wall had crushed doubt before. It was built for exactly this. The eldest of the houses, a tracker so old its crystal had gone nearly clear, rose and asked Hadeth Vorn to explain how he came to be alive when the verge had taken him, in the tone of a creature already certain the answer would be madness. And Hadeth Vorn spoke. He did not stammer. He did not plead. He stood whole in front of the 12,000 hulls and the watching house, and he gave them the truth, in the order a tracker gives anything, leaving nothing out, exactly as he had given it to his crew in the dark of the scent deck. He named Sable Run. He named the 4,000 strangled in the deep by a master who thought it elegant, and he watched the older trackers in the hall flinch, because they remembered the file too, and they had thought it elegant too, and no one had ever said the number aloud in this room before. 4,000. He let it hang. He named the 2 cutters the houses had filed under storm, and he gestured, and the 2 masters beside him stepped forward into the light, alive, masters the hall had grieved and forgotten, and a sound went through the gathered house that no one had ever heard in the spore wall, the sound of 9,000 years of certainty taking its first breath of doubt. He told them about the ardent vow. He told them how it had let itself be tracked, how it had turned 3 days of his own patient hunting into a portrait of his pride, how it had drowned the deep eyes in heavy lies, and erased his footprints, and answered his lifeline with its own voice. He told them it had not killed him. He told them it had wanted him alive, and whole, and standing exactly here, so that the lesson would go home in the mouth of the finest tracker the houses had ever bred, because a dead master teaches nothing, and a frightened master is forgotten, but a master who chooses to carry the truth cannot be unmade. And then Hadeth Vorn said the thing the vow had spent 19 years and 3 cutters to make him willing to say. He said, "The lone ship is not the lost ship. It never was. We have hunted for 9,000 years on one idea, that a tracker is never the tracked, and tonight a single quiet ship proved that idea is a door that swings both ways. Every lone trail we ever followed home might have been a leash held at the other end. The only reason we still believe we cannot be hunted is that the trails which closed all the way left no one to carry the lesson back. I am the lesson. I am carrying it back. We are the finest trackers in the galaxy, and we have spent that gift strangling small quiet worlds because they could not find us in the dark. Sable Run could not find us. That is the only reason we called it prey. Tonight a quiet world found us, and it could have hung the 3 of us on a wall of its own, and we would have earned it, and instead it sent us home alive to tell you that we are not the hunters of the dark. We are only the ones who have not yet been hunted. I am asking you to be the first generation of this house that does not pretend otherwise." The hall was silent. 12,000 hulls hung cold above them, and for the first time in 9,000 years, the hulls did not look like proof. They looked like a confession. The eldest of the houses, the near-clear tracker, was quiet for a long time. Then it asked the question Hadeth had known it would ask, the question that was the last defense of the faith. It asked, "And what would you have us become, Hadeth Vorn, if not hunters? A house that does not hunt is nothing. You ask us to lay down the only thing we are." Hadeth answered with the words he had given Isk in the dark, because they had been true in the dark, and they were truer here. He said, "I ask you to become better trackers, not lesser ones. We can find anything in the deep. That is real, and it is rare, and the galaxy has need of it. There are lost ships in the dark right now, and strangled worlds that no one will warn, and trails gone cold that a housemaster could read in a heartbeat. We were not given the finest eyes in the galaxy to put out the lights of farming moons. We will find the lost and bring them in. We will find the threatened and warn them. We will be trackers still, the best there have ever been, and we will never again call a thing prey because it cannot find us back. That is not the death of the house. That is the first day the house is worth the name. And then Hadith did the thing that ended the faith, and it was not a speech, because the houses could file away a speech. It was an act. He walked to the spore wall, to the great hall of 12,000 trophies, and he reached up to the oldest and coldest of the human hulls. A small freighter hung near the center, and he read the marks on its flank the way only a housemaster could. He read them aloud. He read the registry of a ship out of a strangled world, and then he read the others around it, ship after ship after ship, naming the dead that the houses had hung as proof and kept as ornament. He read them the way the vow had read his buoys back to him, in order, leaving nothing out, until the hall understood what he was doing. He was not honoring the wall. He was emptying it. He was turning every trophy back into a name, and a hung name is not a trophy. It is a grave, and a house that keeps graves on its wall and calls them proof is not a hunter. It is a thing that strangles small worlds and decorates with the leftovers. When Hadith had read 100 names, the first apprentice began to read with him, then a second, then a master. The reading spread across the spore wall the way the descent had spread, name by name, voice by voice, until the great hall of 9,000 years, filled not with the silence of certainty, but with the sound of 12,000 dead being spoken aloud for the first time, and a faith that had stood on a single pin felt the pin come free. The eldest of the houses did not stop it. The near-clear tracker listened to the reading of the names, the long roll of the strangled, and Hadith watched the old creature's clear crystal catch the light of the hall, and understood that the eldest had read every one of those files in its long life, had hung many of those hulls with its own hands, and was hearing them turned from trophies into graves in real time, the way Hadith had heard it in the dark of the Verge. He had wondered whether the eldest would fight him, would call him broken, would use the weight of 9,000 years to crush the reading flat. The eldest did none of those things. It simply listened, and Hadith saw the same thing happen behind its clear old eyes that had happened behind his own, the slow, terrible turning of a faith that has finally been shown its own reflection. Vesk Orant stood at Hadith's side, as the names were read, the old master who had taught Hadith the deep read, and whom the houses had grieved as dead, and when Hadith's voice failed, Vesk took up the reading, and his rough old voice carried the names a while, and then Drail took them up after Vesk, the young proud master made humble, and the three of them passed the roll of the dead between them, the way the vow had passed nothing but the truth between itself and Hadith in the dark. 3 masters the houses had given up for lost, alive and whole, and reading graves aloud in the largest hall in the galaxy. There was no storm current lie that could swallow 3. There was no file deep enough to bury them. The vow had built its lesson exactly to this measure, and the measure held. When the first day of reading ended, the eldest bowed its old clear head, and it said the only thing left to say, which was, "We did not know we could be found." We told ourselves it meant we could not be wrong. Read the rest of the names, Hadith Vorn. We will hear all of them, and then we will decide what a house becomes when it can no longer pretend. They read for 9 days, 12,000 names. The whole house, every master and apprentice and tracker of Vesh Drow, reading the dead of 9,000 years aloud in the spore wall. And when it was done, the wall was not emptied of hulls, but the hulls were no longer trophies, and that was a harder and better thing than tearing them down. The houses kept the wall. They renamed it. They called it the Wall of the Found, and they swore before it that every name on it had been prey only because it could not find them back, and that no name would ever be added again for that reason. And an apprentice that year learned, for the first time in 9,000 years, that the gift of finding things in the dark was meant to bring them home. The tracking houses of Vestrow did not vanish. The vow had not wanted them to vanish. Vanishing was the storm current lie, the easy forgetting. They became something the galaxy had never had. The finest finders in the dark turned to the saving of lost things, and the first ship they found and brought home 2 years later, was a small wandering freighter with a failed drive and 40 cold sleepers aboard, drifting toward a sun. A house cutter tracked it in 3 days and woke the sleepers and brought them in, and the master of that cutter was a sharp creature named Isk, who had read trails since hatching, and who had stood in the dark of the long patience on the night the faith turned over, and who never once in its long career called a found thing prey. HFY Vorn lived a long time after the Verge. He never hunted again, in the old way, and he never wanted to. He taught. He stood the apprentices before the wall of the Found on their first day, the way he had once stood before the Spore wall, and he told them the truth in the order a tracker gives anything, leaving nothing out. He told them about Sable Run. He told them about the ship that let itself be tracked. He told them that he had been the finest tracker the houses ever bred, and that he had been caught in 3 days by a single quiet ship, and that it was the best thing that had ever happened to him, because the catching had given him back the gift he had spent 40 years misusing. And every apprentice that ever passed through his teaching carried the lesson home, and the lesson never once got filed, because HFY had built it the way the vow had built it in him, as a choice the young made themselves, and not a shame anyone could take back. He thought about the ardent vow often, in the years that followed. He never saw it again. He understood that he never would. It had finished its hunt, and it had no need to return to a trail it had already closed. He liked to imagine it out in the dark somewhere, a single lean gray warship running quiet and patient, exactly as large as it needed to be, watching for the next house that had forgotten it could be found. He hoped there were no more such houses for it to find. He suspected there were. He suspected the galaxy was full of certain things that had never been hunted, decorating their walls with the leftovers of small quiet worlds, and he suspected that somewhere a child of one of those worlds was learning patience. He hoped, when that child came for them, it would do what the vow had done. He hoped it would choose the longer hunt, the one that left the killers more alive than before. He had learned, in the Sorel Verge, that it was the only hunt worth winning. The galaxy heard of it within the year, because HFY had sent his last signal in the open where no house could bury it, and because the open dark carries a true thing further than any lie. The other hunting cultures of the deep, the smaller houses and the lesser spore clans that had patterned themselves on Veshdrao for 9,000 years, heard that the greatest of the houses had laid down its faith and read its trophies as graves, and the hearing went through them like cold water. Some of them scoffed, some of them called Veshdrao broken and swore it had gone soft, and went on hunting small quiet worlds in the old way, certain they could never be found. But the wiser ones grew careful. They had built their whole craft on a single belief, that a tracker is never the tracked, and now they knew the belief had a crack in it, and a creature that knows its faith has a crack hunts differently, slower, with one eye always on its own back trail. The humans had not needed to visit those lesser houses at all. The fear had done the visiting for them, carried in the mouth of HFY Vorn, exactly as the vow had designed. One ship, one lesson, and the dark grew quieter across 100 houses that the ardent vow never once approached. That was the true shape of the human victory, and it was a shape the galaxy had never seen a victor choose. The houses could have been burned, 3 cutters could have been ash, Veshdrao could have been a wall of the human's own, a monument to revenge, and the lesser houses would have learned only that the Verge was dangerous and come back with more guns. Instead, the humans had spent 19 patient years on the harder thing, and the harder thing spread on its own and could not be unspread, because you cannot burn a fear out of 100 houses once one true master has planted it. The vow had not won a battle. It had changed what the hunters of the dark believed about themselves, and a changed belief outlives every hull that ever hung on every wall. Far away, in the cold beyond the Verge, the ardent vow held its course, through the open dark, weapons still, and eyes wide, a single human warship that had walked into a hunter's reserve alone, and walked out, having taken everything, and killed nothing. Tilde Aro stood her watch on its quiet bridge, a woman of 41 who had been 9 years old on a strangled moon, and she read the long-range trace of 3 house cutters running home in the open, lit and unhidden and unafraid, and she let herself feel, for the first time in 19 years, the thing she had built the whole hunt to feel. Not revenge. She had been offered revenge, and she had spent it on something better. What she felt, watching the killers of Sable Run carry the truth home in their own mouths, was the thing the houses had never given back to anyone they took. It was the feeling of a lost thing found. She had been 9 years old and certain her world would be strangled, and forgotten and filed under cleared, and instead, 19 years later, the very hand that strangled it was reading its dead aloud in the largest hall in the galaxy and swearing never again. Sable Run would not be forgotten. The houses themselves would remember it now, forever, as the world that taught them what they were. That was a better monument than any wall of trophies. It was the only revenge that could not be hung as a leftover. It was alive, and it would teach, and it would spread house to house and apprentice to apprentice down the long generations, and somewhere in it, small and warm and permanent, 4,000 strangled farmers would go on mattering to the very creatures who had killed them. Tilda Arrow had hunted the tracking houses of Veshdrau for 19 years, and she had caught them, and she let them live. That was the whole of the human war, and it was a war the humans won completely, because at the end of it there was no enemy left, only a house full of trackers reading names off a wall they used to be proud of, and learning, far too late and just in time, that the thing they had spent 9,000 years hunting in the dark had been their own reflection the entire time. The Predator had come to track a lone and wounded ship. The lone and wounded ship had been the patient one, and when the hunt was over, the only creatures still afraid of the dark were the ones who had once called themselves its masters, and even their fear had been turned to something kinder, the careful fear of a finder who has learned what its gift is for. The ardent vow turned its quiet face toward home and ran on into the open dark, having proven the one thing the galaxy had refused to believe about humanity. They were not the loudest species, or the largest, or the cruelest. They were the patient ones. They would let you track them for 3 days. They would let you build them in your mind plate by plate. They would let you believe, all the way to the end, that you were the hunter. And then, gently, without firing a shot, they would show you exactly whose trail you had been walking the whole time, and they would send you home changed, carrying the truth in your own mouth, the finest tracker in 9,000 years, brought low by a single quiet ship, and grateful for it. Somewhere far behind, in the largest hall in the galaxy, an old tracker named Hadith Vorn stood before a wall that was no longer a wall of trophies, and read another name aloud, and an apprentice read it with him, and the faith that had strangled 4,000 farmers on a cold farming moon was gone for good, replaced by something a quiet human warship had hunted across 19 patient years to plant. The Predator had become the hunted, and the hunted had chosen in the end not to kill the Predator, but to teach it how to come home.